Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the moderator of the next session, Alena Kudzko.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our session, which is titled Rooting for the Underdog, Europe's Progress in the Tech Uptake. And let me invite on stage our fantastic panelists. We have with us today Cecilia Bonefeld-Dahl, who is Director General of Digital Europe. Welcome, Cecilia. We also have with us Fabio Costa, Chairman of the Board of Directors, Phyllis Morris, Czech Republic. We also have with us Casper, who is Vice President and Head of EMEA Government Partnerships at Zscaler. Welcome, Casper. Next is
very low
Stefan.
applause for me, I don't know why.
Give us more cheers, please.
Thanks, Ray.
We also have Stefan Lindström, Ambassador for Technology, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Finland. Welcome, Stefan. And we're also joined by Faryar Shirzad, Chief Policy Officer at Coinbase. Welcome, Faryar. Thank you so much for joining. This session is the epitomization of the idea of the Geotech Summit that we have here. Our entire purpose of existing is to make sure we can help Europe accelerate the development, adoption, and diffusion of technology, and looking for constructive ways how we can help with that. So this panel is actually an annual gathering where we check every year what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, give ourselves a better mark for doing things right, or failing ourselves for not doing things right, and again, trying to come up with the ideas how we can do things even better. So that's the first thing that we want to do with you. If we compare the progress that Europe has been doing over the past year, let's start with the positive. Is there something that you would think we have improved in comparison with where we were a year ago? And what item maybe you would have removed from your checklist that you had a year ago? Cecilia, you're going to go first.
Yeah, I think there's been many things. First of all, I mean, the EU is talking about removing burden for companies. It's all about the omnibus and how we can remove regulatory burden, how we can simplify the regulatory environment, how we can do more incentives. So that's the first time we've seen that discussion, and it's actually cascaded to the commissioners in KPIs. Now, of course, we need to deliver, but I can tell you that at least 50% of my organization has been working with all our members exactly on finding out where to remove burden. The other one is we have a defense commissioner. There's been now opening of 6 of the defense programs to invest in dual-use technologies. There are talks about a dedication of 25% of all fundings towards dual-use and critical technologies. So a huge opening that we never would have seen before, that EU can actually invest in dual-use. And what is dual-use? I mean, drone technologies is dual-use, AI is dual-use, cloud is dual-use, connectivity, and so on and so on. So a huge development and a huge opportunity. The SAFE is now out, really investment or loans for investment for the member states for investing in technologies. And I predict that we will have in the MFF programs targeted directly to building digital capabilities, defense and dual-use capabilities on EU level. We heard just in a panel before ideas on should it be the air shield, should it be the drone capabilities that we basically develop on the EU level instead on the national level. So right now we see NATO, another tick off. We have been working very closely with NATO to basically accelerate their procurement processes. And they are adopting the new rapid adoption method where they can purchase technologies at a speed, with 6 to 12 months, whereas before it would take like 8 to 18 years. So amazing developments, and the Diana programs are being rolled out. We see a huge amount of scale-ups working directly with defense, so dual-use technology. And Digital Europe has founded their own dual-use award. And we had, I think, around 25 super cool defense tech or dual-use tech scale-up competing, and 3 of them are already unicorns. So that was the positive version.
That was actually a very long list, so for everybody, feel free to just give quick thumbs up to if you agree with Cecilia, or feel free to find something else that you think was done really well and we should continue doing more. Fabio.
Well, certainly I second the point of Cecilia about regulation. I think this is an aspect where the awareness that in order to move fast, I'm not saying we should break things, but at the same time, we should probably remove some obstacle that we have self-imposed on ourselves. Some of them with good intention, but maybe not with the best of the outcomes. So that's the first part. And I think on the second hand is certainly the fact that today, I think also part to the US administration, we are much higher bar of awareness for what we should be doing. And I think the dependency on critical infrastructure across the board, from energy to tech stack to hyperscales to companies, is something that we definitely need to exploit, and really reconsider from where we were before. Coming back to Europe after 20 years outside, I can see that definitely this awareness is important as a catalyst for us to take action. And so I'm happy to see that we are in this position.
Fantastic. Casper.
So I have to be shorter now. It's sort of all the way down, then shorter and shorter answers.
Well, depends if we are running out of ideas of what went right.
Yeah, and it's a bit of an unfair question to me because I wasn't here last year, but I'll try and give it a shot nonetheless. I think your two obvious replies is that I think a lot of us have been talking about European competitiveness. I mean, it's sort of indirectly in some of the answers you received already. I think nobody today's question whether Europe needs to be able to do more by itself. I think nobody questions whether European companies need to do better in terms of its global competitiveness, and that has to do with simplification and regulation, but it also has to do, I think, with a mindset of Europe understanding that we've been too dependent on external factors. And that's a little bit strange for me to say working for an American technology company, but I would still say it. I think we have an obligation in the industry also to make sure that we invest in Europe on European terms that I think has been reassuring. And the last one, I'll be very short. Working for a cybersecurity and data protection company, needless to say, it's a little bit easier for me and my colleagues to argue and convince people that cybersecurity isn't just sort of a theoretical issue. I mean, when you look at activities not only from Russia but from other criminal networks, state actors, it's pretty evident that no matter what size your organization is, you need to have state-of-the-art cybersecurity protection in order to avoid any existential threats to your setup. That was 43 seconds, more or less. So I think
that's the record, Casper.
Okay, good, thanks.
And now I'm going to make it a little bit more difficult to Stefan, because I'm going to go to Faryar first, because he hasn't been here last year. So Faryar, tell us what you've been happy about Europe doing very well over the last year.
I think it's hard to answer the question, largely because Europe expresses itself through regulation. And the challenge I think that Europe has is whether it can actually embrace some of the recent kind of commitments to reducing the regulatory burden of operating in Europe. I think Europe has enormous talent, and the question is whether that talent has the room to grow. As I'm the chief policy officer at Coinbase, and what Europe did extraordinarily well a year plus ago was to implement MiCA, the market and crypto asset regulation, really one of the most thoughtful frameworks for regulation anywhere in any market around the world. We're now at the period in which the licenses under MiCA are being issued, and that process is the outcome of that we'll have to see over the next 6 months, whether that results in the optimistic vision of MiCA implementing in a way that's consistent with that optimism, or whether there'll be a defensive framework in terms of the caution that comes from some of the European central regulatory authorities, ESMA and otherwise, in terms of allowing companies to come into the market, operate on a level playing field and the rest. So I would say there's a lot to feel optimistic about, but it's always the execution and the outcomes that we'll have to see, and those take some time.
Perfect. And Stefan?
Yeah, I'm going to give you a Kimi Räikkönen answer. We have a new commission. Having said that, the new commission and the working program with the commission, of course, has recognized that Europe is in a crisis. It's very clearly pointed out in the Prodi report, in the Minister report, what should be done. We have given away so much, and it's really self-inflicted in many ways. Also financing technology from authoritarian countries is one example of that. Things have not really gone the right way. But my point is really, let's not waste a good crisis. let's see what we can do, what we can bring forward. And the Commission's working program now is very ambitious. It really looks into the technology issues that we should be looking into. Personally, I would like to see even greater speed in implementing everything. Also bringing things like the 5G toolbox, for instance. It's now a recommendation. It should be made mandatory. Of course, this is going to create a lot of legal issues because the Commission does not have a competence on issues related to national security. But in the long run, this is something that we really need to be doing more pro-Europe for each other instead of just taking the cheapest alternative from countries that do not necessarily share the same values as we do.
Now the task is a bit more challenging because we're going to be looking for things what Europe can do a little bit differently. The whole panel is set up along the concept of basically overcoming the challenge from the position of the underdog. And sometimes if you're an underdog, you need to do things differently. You cannot just replicate what others are doing, but find your unique value proposition, your advantages, things where you're strong, where you can potentially leapfrog your competitors. And that's the task for our next round. But actually, Faryar, I want to go back with you with a rather unconventional question, because we've been discussing in Europe a lot of solutions, and many of them actually are not necessarily dramatically new. They're just better ways of doing things or integrating the technology that's out there. You're coming from a little bit of a different sector. You are involved significantly in digital currencies, and that's the discussion that's rather prevalent in other parts of the world, not necessarily in Europe. In the US, there is quite a lot of attention to cryptocurrencies. Can you give us a little bit of stimulation and creative thinking? What can Europe do in terms of competitiveness and progress in adopting technology if you try to start thinking in this framework of digital currencies?
It's a very good question. I would say a point of context is probably a good way to start in the answer to that question. So in the United States right now, I'll just give you one example of what's happening in digital asset policy. The Securities and Exchange Commission is very actively in the process of providing what's known in the US as exemptive relief, essentially an allowance for companies to issue stock in digitally native form. So essentially issuing equity on the blockchain through a tokenized version of the stock. That tokenized stock can then be traded on smart contracts in a decentralized fashion, essentially peer-to-peer. This is for people who understand what I just said, will understand that this is a dramatic...
Can you translate it?
Yeah. So right now, when companies issue stock, they typically issue it in a paper form. That paper form is represented in a digital share receipt. And then there's a series of financial intermediaries that are responsible for holding that receipt and then executing the trades on that receipt, being the intermediary between an investor and the markets in terms of how the stock gets traded. It's a very complicated process that involves a whole series of intermediaries. What the SEC is on the verge of doing is saying that a company, let's say it's Apple or Coinbase or any other public company, can issue the stock not in a paper form, but on a blockchain-based tokenized form, and that can be traded peer-to-peer without any of those intermediaries. So I could hold that stock in my self-hosted wallet, trade it with another panelist who holds it in his or her self-hosted wallet, and the trade is executed through a software protocol that governs the terms under which we trade the stock. This would disintermediate potentially stock exchanges, custodians, and a series of other sort of market participants. Europe has a decision to make right now whether they watch the Americans do this and then take some time to decide how to respond, or to move much more quickly in moving to digitize and tokenize European capital market activity. That's an issue that's live right now. I don't think very many people are aware of how quickly the Americans are moving towards tokenization of financial activity, banking activity, and capital market activity. But it's a good test case of a very rapidly moving trend where the Americans are moving aggressively to move to 21st century technology in the financial system, where most other jurisdictions, Europeans included, have very little awareness of what's happening. and have not yet really developed a policy response to it. And I think it's just a good example of what can happen where one jurisdiction moves quickly, particularly a fast one like the United States. So we may well find ourselves not long from now, a few years from now, wondering how it is that the European capital markets are still operating under 20th century technology while the Americans have moved to 21st century technology. But Europe has an opportunity to catch up quickly. They have a good framework under MiCA. They just need to understand, ESMA and the other bodies have to understand that they need to provide allowances for the tokenized capital market activities to occur in Europe.
That's a great element of the conversation. In Europe, we're still discussing how to have functioning capital markets. Yeah. And I think that's definitely 2 steps ahead of the conversation that is happening here. Cecilia, I'll go back to you. You are talking with quite a lot of industry representatives. And from your analysis, again, if we're talking not just about catching up, but if we're talking about leapfrogging, how would you formulate the areas where Europe needs to double down first and foremost? Again, not to just try to follow what everybody else is doing, but the areas where you think Europeans can really take the lead and maybe get ahead of the others?
Yeah, then I would allow myself to think out of the box totally. I mean, one of our biggest strengths lies in the fact that Ukraine is European. Right now, they're disrupting any kind of technology innovation that we have ever seen. And 80% of their targets is being hit by drones. And why? Because they are doing software warfare. They are able to basically upgrade their military capabilities within weeks, where normally we do it within like 20 years. So the first thing I would do is to let Ukraine, of course, into the EU. You know, I know everybody says it's difficult, but it must happen and it should happen. The other thing I would do was to quit discussing who has the competence on defense, because it doesn't really matter once you're under attack, right? Who has the competence on what? Right now, EU has around 80 military systems, and I think US has around 30 something. And so I would basically look at investing EU fund in the dual use area and in the areas of civil critical infrastructure. So water, energy, airports, ports, hospitals, etc. Because many of the things that we really need to use in warfare, as the same things that we need to protect our critical infrastructure. And right now we have 2 battlefields. We have the battlefield on critical infrastructure, attacking water infrastructure, energies, hospitals, etc. And we have the real battlefield. But if we invest dual-use technologies in protecting critical infrastructure, first of all, we don't have to discuss if it's defense or not, because it's not. Second of all, we can build the drones, we can build the cyber defense, we can build the advanced connectivity, safe connectivity. We can, even strengthen our position out of the critical technologies. Europe leads in energy tech. We lead in connectivity. We have huge advantage in drones, especially in the innovation cycles of drones. So we would even strengthen our strength positions and then, of course, work with our trusted allies on the rest. And third, I think basically doing those 2 things. Focus at our strength, work together with partners on the rest, and then quit talking about member states and EU and who has the competence, and develop really a tech, I would say, civil protection of all our critical infrastructure that is interoperable across Europe. That would be my silver bullet to up our game and stop doing these little procurements in Denmark and a little procurement in Germany and a little procurement in Spain, but really move to the next level of scalable technologies.
On that note, I want to use the question that somebody posted on Slido. And by the way, a reminder to everybody, we have the Slido app. Please keep the questions coming. We're going to be picking up them from here. And if somebody wants to ask a question live, please wave your hand and I'll try to bring you up in person as well. So the question on Slido is, can Europe become a European AI superpower? And what urgent steps should the EU take to develop Ukraine's AI ecosystem and infrastructure? And Cecilia, you already mentioned Ukraine. And of course, the easiest solution is just bring it into the EU. But probably you can do quite a lot even before that happens. So I'm just wondering whether anybody else has a quick thought on Ukraine and how that could help Europeans with either developing new technology, testing it, or scaling it up in the European context entirely.
I mean, look, I think if I when you look at technology, fundamentally we have to innovate, doing a lot of A/B testing and experimentation. Clearly, when you are unfortunately in a live situation like the one in Ukraine, when you kind of have to do it on a daily basis to try to break through, you have the natural territory that you will have otherwise in civilian space for our situations. So clearly, there is an element there where we could, as you pointed out, Cecilia, use that type of experimentation territory, which is unfortunately happening, to foster and eventually capitalize on other elements of the tech stack that we currently cannot test, right? Or we don't test with the same level of urgency. So that is one element. When it comes to the AI ecosystem and infrastructure, I think this we will need to see. I cannot speak about what is on the ground in Ukraine, I don't know. But when I talk about and I see what is necessary to compete at scale, that's something that we will need much more scale here on the other side of sort of Europe to be able to sort of support that. And it comes down to energy, which you pointed out as well. And unfortunately, our ability to put down energy is not very, very, very high. We do it, it takes too much time. I always point out the Flamanville plant in France that takes 17 years to complete. I think we can't expect that to be a benchmark. We need to do it much faster. And any indicator points that we have to think about energy as an absolutely critical point for us when it comes to AI empowerment. We cannot do AI without energy. Maybe things will change in the future, but today this is the state. So I think we have to think about all these components. So the ecosystem and infrastructure, I think there is an infrastructure that we can build here to support that. And then we have the tip of the capabilities there to A/B test on a much more accelerated pace than we will otherwise have here.
Casper, you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, sure. And if you allow me to sort of paraphrase that question a little bit, because I think when you speak to European leaders, whether it's in the private sector or in the political sphere, I think the question they ask themselves is actually whether Europe will become a global AI superpower or not. I mean, I think that's very much top of mind. I'd be interesting if I can just make a small survey in this room. How many of you do you think as Europe will become a global AI superpower? Could you just raise your hand if you think that's possible? Okay, Jesus, I mean, you're more pessimistic than I am, and I'm a former diplomat. Okay, a good digital Europe think it's possible. That's good to see here. I think the problem here is, and it goes back to what Europe hasn't done in the past, is that there are a lot of concerns about whether Europe will cut it in the digital age. And when you look at where the innovation on artificial is coming from, we have to be a bit honest in saying it's primarily coming outside Europe. You have European companies, startups that are doing really well, and when they become extremely well, they're normally acquired by some of the bigger companies, and then they go global. So I think this is really what keeps European decision makers awake at night. And then if I may just add one thing where I think the world is very different, and I get my salary to say what I'm going to say now, but stay with me for a second. I think when you look back at the last 4 months, I've been sort of working in international affairs and diplomacy for the last two decades, including with Stefan. I think it would be very foolish to underestimate the dramatic impact that the last 4 months have had on the mindset and the psychology of decision makers in Europe. Now, I work for a US technology company. I can share, nobody's listening in, right? It's Chatham House rules almost here. I can tell you that both political leaders and private companies are getting increasingly concerned about utilizing US technology in the kind of geopolitical environment we're in right now. I actually think that is one of the dangers or risks in making sure that Europe will remain competitive. I'm European, as you can hear. I understand the concerns, but I think it is incredibly important that we retain a very strong collaboration across the Atlantic, both politically, but also in the absence, perhaps, of a strong transatlantic political relationship, that the private sector will continue to work closer together. Because I think some of you spoke about values and institutional setups, etc. The US and Europe need each other, and we need each other in the kind of world we're looking into, because there are other competitors out there that have a very different approach than we do.
There are several interesting points that we want to follow up for sure from what you said, but I'll start with one. You talked about the fact that, yes, we have innovation, but then people go abroad, work abroad, or simply we cannot scale innovation at home. So, Stefan, I want to go to you and actually talk to you about scaling innovation from the industrial perspective. AI is actually a very interesting case, because in some ways AI didn't come, it probably in some ways the most democratic tech that we have, just because everybody can get it almost for free from the multiple tools that are available, but we almost skips this stage of industrialization of AI. But Finland is probably one of the areas or one of the countries where it's not necessarily such a dire situation. Can you lead us through what it takes to scale AI in the industrial environment, and how to make sure that actually big enterprises are utilizing all the capabilities that come with AI?
I think the short answer is continual education. Already 8 years ago, Finland, or a Finnish company then submitted by the government, created something called Elements of AI. And this was a course that you could get 1 study credit from a university when you passed the course. And it was teaching the general public, anyone really, how to utilize AI, what is AI, what can it do and what can it not. Of course, now we have seen an accelerating pace the last years. But this was just a basic concept. I did it together with, my father is now 85 and my sons are 16 and 19. And we did it some 6-7 years ago with both of those. So I have 3 guinea pigs to see it test a little bit of how do they understand these issues. And of course, it's a totally different generational issue for this. The young ones get it immediately. They see how to use it, and sort of the older ones are a little bit more reversed. What is really going on? I don't understand it, and so forth. The big problem there is, of course, that how quickly can we utilize AI then in the industrial application, in the industrial production. And there I think EU is lacking behind compared to the US, for instance, where they quickly take it on board and start testing it, seeing what does it bring. We are more cautious about it. And I would love to see a more progressive approach on that. We are quite good in that sense that we have a good general educational level in Finland, and people are willing to test new things. And that's maybe the key. So coming back again to the continual education, but it has to be at all levels, including everyone in the society. Then it works. And then we come back to the question again that is very simple to say in diplomacy or anywhere else: trust. Finland is the happiest people in the world, and that comes down to trust. Trust between the government and the people. And same thing with AI.
We just actually did a study, and that's exactly what we want to look at, compare the AI adoption in Europe versus US and other parts of the world. And to my surprise, and again, you can of course argue about measurements and indicators and everything, but the numbers for Europe are actually even slightly better than for the United States in terms of the AI adoption by enterprises in Europe. Of course, the trouble that exists in Europe is that there's a huge differences between different regions in Europe. The more to the west or the Nordics are doing very well, but then you have also countries who are a bit more to the east, and that's where the things are not entirely working. Of course, the real competitor there is probably in other parts of the world, be it China or even the Gulf states right now. But this is probably something that's even there, the reality gradually starts to change in terms of even in Europe, there is more and more businesses, both small and bigger, who are adopting AI. And like, again, if you're using this benchmark of the US, potentially, depending, of course, how you look at it, the situation might not be that dire. But Fabio, I just wanted to get back with you with the same question about the scaling technology and AI in industrial environment. You're running a pretty big multinational company. How does that work for you?
We were very conservative at the beginning. Clearly, we operate also in a territory where we have to be even more conservative because of the space where we operate as Finmars. Contextually, internally, we've been doing through a pretty big transformation to move towards science-based sort of evidence of our new generation of products. And I think that has been the catalyst for bringing people from outside. I spent 10 years in technology before joining. Definitely I could see that introducing this new technology within your own infrastructure has taken some time, and it's a progressive approach. In some cases, we've been using the traditional tools provided already by the providers, whether it's Copilot or similar. And at the same time, we have played in developing our own, using a bit more of foundational technology. But going back even 10 years ago in our companies, I think when you start looking at what it takes to be not necessarily a user, but a developer of this technology, and then start building on the application layers on top, I think that's where we kind of have to think about as Europeans, where do we want to sit? Because there's many pieces that are missing, and we can certainly use it, but then those models are developed somewhere else, and eventually that issue of trust will become more apparent in that case.
And I'll start bringing in people, and Steve, you're first.
Just wanted to add in just a bit of a note. I mean, I think there's a lot of modesty. We've kind of become ritualized about Europe's inhibitions, and I agree. I don't believe that Europe is going to be a major power in the near term in AI, but Siemens is. I mean, Siemens is probably the least recognized major player in industrial AI in the world. They created digital twins and no one knows it. They're really the driver in industrial AI. Their partnerships in the US, what they're doing in data centers, and really transforming the AI data, energy, utility, infrastructure landscape in the United States, particularly Dallas, Texas is going to be a superpower in that area, is pretty remarkable. And so I just wanted to put that out there. Now the question is, why can't Siemens do that in an unbridled way in Europe? That's the bigger issue. But when you look at innovation centers where they're out there, and there may be other companies that I'm unaware of that are like that. The issue is within Europe itself, if you were to wall it off, it'd be pretty pathetic. It's the partnerships that you have across these borders. But so I wanted to put that out there as just a point of fact that I think is important to the Europe and transatlantic dimension of this. But the other side of it on AI, but I also think it's related to crypto, is on the innovation side. I think the battle is going to be between permissionless innovation and guardrail innovation. There are a lot of players obsessed with guardrails before we even know where you got. And if you're a competitor out there strategically as China or other players that basically have a permissionless innovation, particularly when you get in the national security space, you're automatically locking yourself into a loss. And so I'm just sort of interested in whether that is felt in any urgent way in both business leadership, in policy circles, because there's a kind of blandness to the conversation where I'm not sure European policymakers are taking the competition seriously. And I would also say the same thing in crypto. We're seeing a lot of innovation, Faryar, but it could be so much greater and better. And it challenges the incumbent order in ways, and I'm wondering if there's a realization of that.
I'll start with Faryar on that one, and then Cecilia, go to you.
Yeah, the parallels between crypto and AI are actually very important. I think you're right to raise it. There are two obvious areas where crypto technology and AI have to come and will work together. One is there's the whole question about whether the output of an AI protocol is a deep fake or authenticated. And the only way that you can authenticate the data and create the appropriate paper trails to ensure that the data inputs in the algorithm are verifiable is through tokenization. So there's a lot of projects that are beginning the process of having those who produce data, news outlets or others, to tokenize the news content that they produce, and then that tokenized news content can be verified inputs into an AI protocol so that you ensure that the other side of what comes out of the protocol is actually based on authenticated data. So it's a verification layer of AI. The other area is with agentic AI. So if you get on your AI protocol and ask it to book a vacation for you or to source something and purchase whatever on your behalf, the only payment mechanism that the protocol can operate under is a tokenized payment mechanism, and those two things are areas in which are natural parts of an AI strategy. But I think Steve's right to say that I don't think people are thinking outside the box enough to understand that the digital asset market, the crypto market, is not just sort of what people sometimes dismiss as a meme coin market. It's actually a critical element of things where there is a political consensus that Europe should lead, AI being the most obvious example.
Let's do another poll right now. Who has been thinking about tokenized AI inputs and tokenized AI agents? Okay, Steve, anybody else? Okay, 3 people in the room, including Faryar. So that probably tells a lot, and that you're exactly right. But Cecilia.
Yeah, so just there was a question before on how important digitalization is for the industrial development of Europe. I would say it's going to disrupt the whole thing. And it will happen, and it is happening. I mean, since I would say the last cycle of old-fashioned development cycles stopped in 2008. Over the 2008 crisis, we had cloud solutions, AI solutions, and everything went global scale. Our problem in Europe is that we have countries, that we do everything in nation states, which are teeny-weeny. And we had competition law where we decided that small is beautiful and big is bad, right? Which basically stopped. I mean, we even stopped technology. We stopped a merger on train signaling technologies. I don't even think it's a technology. I'm sorry, guys. It's like, I don't know what it is. So we had merger laws, and one other thing we have procurement, national procurement. The money is so small, and it really has created a market where only huge companies can afford the compliance cost and to bid for a tender that is so small that it doesn't really matter in the books. And on top of that, we had a tool that said price is the most important, and that's back to the gentleman's point. We have some of the world's best technology leaders. We never talk about them. We talk about how we don't like the big Americans and we're afraid of the one thing or the other thing. We have Siemens, Schneider, SAP, Nokia, Ericsson. I mean, US doesn't have, Nokia and Ericsson 5G. We have them. But we are the continent that has the least implementation of 5G. So again, it's a little bit back to lacking the scale and really cutting that and saying, okay, price is not the most important. And right now, as we speak, critical infrastructure and mobility is mainly Chinese investments because they have the better batteries, they have the cheapest prices, so they win all the public tenders. So I don't think we're paying enough attention to actually that we're shooting ourselves in the foot for that development. But it's all, the good thing is, that's all up for discussion right now. We are discussing on EU level to basically loosen up the competition law. We are opening the procurement directive to basically have other criteria in there. And right now, I just heard Kabilius also say, maybe there are areas where EU can build capabilities. And again, now we can invest in dual use. So that might be, for example, secure connectivity or digital twins for energy optimization, because we lead in energy tech. I mean, I don't think the problem is only that we are not leading in AI. If we're leading in energy tech, everything needs energy, and we lead in those technologies, so what's the problem? So we need to play also at our strength and, work where we don't have the strength, we work with others. That's how the world is. And I think in the transatlantic relation, industry is the bridge. We will continue working with each other. We need each other across the Atlantic. We're totally interlinked in how we do our supply chains, and we have different strengths, and Europe needs to also strengthen where we are strong instead of just looking where we are weak all the time.
And to connect that also to Steve's point about regulation or lack of regulation and what capabilities that provides, even for Nokia and Ericsson, much of the things that they're doing, for example, the reliance on China for them was not because of the market share, but because they could go and train AI products in China and then use some of the things that were discovered there in terms of capabilities in other contexts as well. But Casper, you were raising your hand.
Yeah, no, listen, I think the difference, and we can always point to companies that are very successful. Steve and Cecilia did that already. I completely agree with it. But I think we also have to be a little bit realistic here that the dominance of other companies with other technologies is much more, intrusive. It goes deeper. The bundling of different products, I think, is very much what is Europe's problem these days. I would agree with Cecilia on one thing, which I think is important, is when you look at the European Commission, and I'll say something controversial because I'm Danish, I think, the former Commissioner Vestager, who in my home country is considered sort of a semi-god, so saying anything critical about her is by default almost blasphemic, but I'll do that right now. You were here when it happened. My career is over now in politics after what I'm going to say. I think she was fighting, a competition issue that belonged 10 years before she was actually in office. I think she was fighting competition inside the European Union when in fact the real competition issue was whether European companies would be globally competitive. Full stop. I think that was a huge mistake. We realize that today. The other thing I would say in terms of how Europe will become better, and now I'll say something which is actually a little bit controversial as well. One thing is, of course, to fix the internal market. Everybody's saying that. It doesn't work, which means that when you have a small, successful startup in Europe, it's extremely difficult to penetrate 27 different member states because you have market obstacles, across the internal market. I think that is a much more important fight to take than actually having access to risk-willing capital. Fix that, which is also what Draghi and Letta and others are pointing to as well. Then I'll say one thing. Digital sovereignty on steroids is basically what we're facing right now, I would argue, for good reasons, because Europe is concerned. I will make one prediction here, and you know, others will disagree heavily with me. We talk about simplification, we talk about deregulation. Those are the buzzwords of today, and certainly buzzwords inside the European Commission. How do you think the European Commission is going to promote digital sovereignty in Europe? I will argue that I think it's going to be extremely difficult for the European Commission to do that without imposing new pieces of regulations. That will make it necessary for non-European companies to partner up with European companies to make it absolutely essential that data will not leave the European Union, that monetization of data sets will remain, etc. I think we are going to see a new way of regulation coming forward, and therefore I remain a little bit hesitant on whether the deregulatory and simplification agenda is going to stick with us. It's not necessarily going to be a bad thing, because I do think that companies will have to adjust and adapt to Europe, not the other way around. And I think for a lot of companies, it's not a bad thing to say we have to make sure that the data sets will remain European and that Europe will really be the ones that will benefit from the data sets that are created in Europe. I think that's an obligation we have as a technology company, certainly something that we take quite seriously in my company.
Casper, to follow up on that one, obviously there's like a push to have a bit more control over the technology, over the data, but there is also realization that that's unrealistic in the pure of the form. How would you describe in which direction we're going in terms of how to find the solutions somewhere midway? What are the good cases, examples of how it can work? Be it, for example, the joint ventures or joint investments in infrastructure, having command and control here in Europe. How would you formulate what is the winning formula that could provide some better feeling about the digital sovereignty and control over what we have without necessarily going the full way?
No, I mean, everybody talks about it. But it's very difficult to do it in a short term. Consolidation is one issue. What sprang to my mind when I was listening to Cecilia was, well, of course, looking at the 5G market in Europe, and the reason why we have not rolled out in a way that we should have is, of course, consolidation. You look at the US, I think the average amount of subscribers is about 110 million per operator. In China, it's about 350. In India, it's 300 million. The average amount of subscribers in a European network today is 3.9 million. The magnitudes are just of difference. And it's the same thing when you start building cloud. You don't build it like this. It has to be a very long-term effort with a competence to really deal with these issues for real, not just talk about it. And that has been the European approach for way too long on these issues. The other thing is also what we actually talked about with Casper a couple of hours ago is the sort of education of the technology issues to decision makers, policy makers. Do they really understand what crypto is? Do they really understand how a 5G or 6G network operates? Do they understand what cloud is? And what is digital sovereignty? I talk to what I call third countries on a daily basis, people who come from Africa, Latin America, from Asia, and educating them about what does digital sovereignty mean for them, what does it mean for your decision making, for your security, for your future. If you make a decision today, you are bound by that decision for the next 15 years, and all your manuals are in Chinese. I mean, how do you operate a network? How do you repair a network or any kind of data center if this is the situation? These are the issues that we have to talk about. And to get forward on those, it's not a small issue, but again, we come back to the education side and the understanding side. It's incredibly complex. I mean, I'm a lawyer, so learning these things has been really hard, but at least even if I don't understand how a quantum computer works, I understand the effects that quantum computing will have on foreign policy, on security policy, on trade policy.
So potential ideas to make the essential AI course mandatory by EU directive.
By the way, it is translated to 27 languages now, and it's increasing all the time. So have a look, elements of AI.
So we're starting to run out of time. So I'll let everybody to make one quick comment. And as an idea, we would really want to hear from you one priority that you think you personally or we collectively need to focus over the next year. And we'll have to come back to it next year when we see you in Prague again. So Faryar, you're going to go first.
Yeah, I would say what Europe has is extraordinary universities that produce unbelievable levels of talent. That talent is all over Silicon Valley and all around the United States working. But I think Europe should be, have some appreciation for how strong the talent pool is in Europe, and to do everything it can, including through measures like that are envisioned in the Draghi report, to create some space from a regulatory perspective for people to innovate, take risk, and do things that allow them to build the next generation of innovations in Europe. I do think there's, at the moment, one of the headwinds that the Europeans face is, there's a lot of focus about where the United States is and whether the United States is a friend or not a friend or what have you. And what I would just, my encouragement to our European friends is, don't overthink the American posture. Americans want Europe to be strong, taking actions in response to events of the moment happening in the United States in a way that then undoes some of the potential we have in terms of reducing regulation and burdens in Europe would be a mistake, because a strong Europe and a strong United States would work very well together. And I think providing regulatory room for European talent to build is, I think, the ultimate answer.
Stefan, you're next, and let's try to be short.
I'm going to build on that because you ended on the US. Do not think that the US-Europe relationship is dead. Way from dead. Let's develop it together. Let's build these partnerships, not dependencies in different ways. And that's a long-term issue. We share the same values, we share the same goals. Let's work them out.
Casper?
2 points. One, just to follow up on Stefan, I think in times of political turmoil and when the political relationship is strained, the private sector will have to step up to the plate and be the custodians of that transatlantic relationship. That's a shared responsibility, first point. The second one is, artificial intelligence. We work with 40% of the Forbes Fortune 500 companies. When we ask the CXOs of these companies what they are most concerned about in applying AI, it's very often data protection or the necessity of protecting the data sets. That is one of the obstacles of Europe moving ahead. We have to make sure the companies, including the one I represent, will defend those data sets for any price to make sure that we can see digitalization moving ahead. I think it's essential for European competitiveness.
Fabio?
To me, an underdog has an advantage only when you can actually play to his advantage of being a bit outside the radar and trying new things. In order to then scale to becoming a true dog, we need to create a sort of a meta-European layer of through which companies can accelerate. Scaling is extremely difficult. And I think that is an angle that we can somehow create those boundaries and eliminate these boundaries at the same time via reducing regulation. So a number of elements we can play there to really win.
Cecilia?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there needs to be some kind of pan-European focus area, for example, like dual use for critical technologies, where we have one big program that is done on EU level, really huge investments, bringing the next technology leap into force. I'm giving it a name soon. Maybe the Copenhagen program or something like this.
We call it yesterday, Copenhagen Manhattan Project.
Yeah, exactly. So a new idea was born. And then I think the EU-US idea, we have this idea of a dual-use and critical technology council, maybe followed by a free trade zone on innovation for critical and dual-use technologies. It's a little bit far ahead now, but it has to be there. What's the alternative? Together we're stronger in the end.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everybody. What I should have mentioned is also next year we're going to ask you what you personally have done to make sure that your priorities convert to reality. So thank you so much for being here with us. Please be back at 4:30 when we have a new session on protecting children in the armed conflict. And also for everybody, there's going to be a special briefing at 6 p.m. On the stage next door with a focus on Israel and Iran. We're going to have... I'm being corrected. That's on this stage at 6 p.m. We're going to have General Yadlin from Israeli Defense Forces and General Allen, retired U.S. Marine Corps General, who used to work as a special envoy for the Middle East and worked also on the Israel-Palestine issues. So they're going to be talking about what's going on right now in the region as a special briefing at 6 p.m. And thank you so much, everybody, for being with us, and thank you so much for the fantastic panel.